Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at chapter 25 from the Road to Latin textbook, and specifically the story from that chapter called De Certaminibus Romanis. So like I always tell you in these videos, if you want to see the story in a different way or get some more resources on it, I'd encourage you to check out my site, my textbook, Nova Latin. You can find grammar help, vocab help, videos, notes, everything you might need to really unpack this chapter. Make sure you're feeling really good about it. You can also find some practice problems, links to different things. So feel free to check it out just if you want to make sure that you feel really good about the story, the grammar involved, and all the vocab. So like I tell you in all these videos, before we dive into the story, the first thing you really need to have under control when you start a new chapter is all the vocab. It's really difficult to understand what's going on if you don't know what the new words are, and it's also a good chance to go back and practice some of the older words. In this chapter, chapter 25, you're halfway through the textbook, so there's been a lot of words you've been exposed to, and you really want to make sure that you feel pretty comfortable with all of them. The good thing about Road to Latin is they will repeat a lot of the words, but still, you want to just on your own go back every once in a while and do some vocab practice just to make sure that you're feeling good with some of the older stuff. The other thing you want to do is make sure you've read through the grammar notes and you've practiced it a little bit. It will help you reading the story. You can do it a different way and read the story and then figure out the grammar. But I'd always recommend you at least at some point go back, read through the notes, and make sure you're feeling really comfortable so you can understand what all these stories are about. Okay. The last thing I tell you is you want to read this story aloud. So if you can find someone to read it to, practice your speaking, your pronunciation. Even better if you can find someone to read it back to you so you can work on your listening. You never want to turn those two parts of your brain off. The speaking and listening is really how reading happens. And I would say that at the end of the day, it's more important to learn how to read Latin than just translate it in your head. So once you have all that under control, I'd encourage you to go through this video. And as long as your translation of the story matches up pretty close to what I have, it doesn't have to be perfect, but on the right track, you can feel that you're doing a pretty good job and feel comfortable that you've understood what's going on in this chapter. Now, before we do that, though, like I always do at the beginning of a chapter, I'll give you a quick overview of the grammar. So we're still dealing with third declension nouns, right? So this is something we've been doing for a few chapters, just because there's a lot of sort of nuance to them that you can really unpack. But in this chapter, we're looking at the neuter version of third declension nouns. So you want to remember a little bit on your, the topic of gender, right? Grammatical gender when it comes to Latin. And so do a little bit on that. If you look at my textbook, you can find some notes on it. But the general idea is pretty straightforward. You can use neuter nouns in the third declension, right? So we've seen second declension neuters, now you have third declension neuters. And you want to remember that when you're dealing with neuter nouns, the nominative and accusative are always the same thing. So in the singular for third declension, that looks a little different because on our chart, you're going to see it's a dash for both. What that means is whatever the nominative singular is, and remember for third declension, it could be a bunch of different things. Whatever it is, that's also the accusative singular. Okay, so they're going to be the exact same thing. In the plural, it's easier to spot. They're both going to end in an A. Okay, those two basic notes are all you really need. Again, a quick refresher of gender you can find on the textbook on my website. That would help you out. But really what you're trying to do is understand this chart. So now we have first, second, and third declension nouns, right? And we have all three genders, right? Masculine, feminine, and neuter. So if you kind of narrow into that third declension column, you'll see that we now have a neuter column in there. And the only difference between neuter from masculine and feminine when it comes to third declension is the nominative and the accusative endings, right? So you can see under the neuter column, the nominative singular is a dash, the accusative singular is a dash. The nominative plural is an A, the accusative plural is an A. That's all we're really doing. Okay, so it gets some practice, or it takes some getting used to, I should say, through practice. But the more third declension neuter nouns you see, the more comfortable you'll be at the endings, and you won't have any problem with this. Okay, so if you need more than that, feel free to check out my website, like I said, but otherwise I'm going to dive into the story and you should just follow along after you've practiced it, right? You don't want this to necessarily be the first time you've heard the story, but if you've practiced it, you've read through it, you've done the read and reread method, which we always talk about, right? So as you read through it the first time, write down any vocab, any grammar you don't understand, look all that up, and then keep reading it until you can go through it without needing a dictionary or grammar help. That's how you know you're on the right track. So if you can do that and it matches pretty close to what we're going to do now, you're on the right track and you should feel pretty good and pretty comfortable with it. So let's dive in. Chapter 25 is all about the games, right? So if you're looking for a culture unit as a side note, I'd encourage you to check out my unit on gladiator fights and the Colosseum, or chariot racing and the Circus Maximus. You can find them both on Nova Latin, just so you understand the background, the historical and cultural background of this. But we start with this. We have Populus Romanus, Ludus et Spectacula amabat. So your subject is the Roman people. Right, the Roman people loved, it's imperfect, so they were loving, you could say, but they loved games, ludos, and spectacles, right, spectacula. So there's a neuter word, right? So spectaculum is a second declension neuter noun. So it's not third declension, but here you have the same idea. In that accusative plural, we have an A, right? So again, we're just getting used to neuters again. Then you have eran, ludi gladiatorii, certamina quadrigarum alia spectacula. Okay, so they were, you might say, the games and the spectacles. They were gladiator games, ludi gladiatorii, right? Gladiatorial games, you might say. And here we have the word certamina. So certamen is a third declension neuter noun. So we're seeing here that A is actually nominative plural. How do we know that, right? It's a good chance to step back. Well, when you have the verb to be, you're dealing with the nominative, right? Something was something. Okay, so we know from the context that it's going to be nominative, and the plural ends in an A because it's neuter, right? So you don't want to get thrown off by that A ending. I know we've seen it a lot in first declension as a nominative singular ending. Here it's nominative plural because it's a third declension neuter. So it's saying there were gladiator games. Certamina means like competitions, right? Contests. And you have quadrigarum, which means of chariots, right? The quadriga is the 4-horse chariot. So certamina quadrigarum are really chariot races. So gladiator games, chariot races, and alia spectacula, other spectacles. Again, it's another neuter plural word. Then you have Romani, ludos gladiatorios et certamina quadrigarum libenter spectaban. So the Romans is my subject, right? So the word Romani, it has to be nominative plural, right? Just by the context, there's nothing else that would really fit there. You're saying the Romans watched spectaban. They happily or gladly watched libenter spectaban, the ludos gladiatorios, right? That one's easy to spot. The OS ending is your accusative direct object, right? Accusative plural, I should say. And they happily watched the certamina. Now, here's a good chance to see what's going on with third declension. Certamina is spelled the exact same way as certamina in the previous line, right? So how come in the previous line it was nominative and in this line it's accusative? Very easy. You have to look at the context. The certamina quadrigarum means literally the competitions of the chariots, the chariot races. The chariot races are not doing anything, right? So they are not the subject. And because it's a neuter word, the nominative plural and accusative plural both end in A. They look very similar. Here it's accusative plural. You can tell by the context they're the things that the Romans like to watch. So again, that line is the Romans gladly or happily watched the gladiator games and the chariot races, the certamina quadrigarum. Okay? Then we continue. You have certamen quadrigarum in circo maximo erat et populo Romano maxime acceptum erat. So here we have certamen again. It's a third declension neuter noun. Okay, you can see there that certamen has a weird ending. Men, that would be the dash on our chart, right? How do we know it's nominative? By the context. You're saying the competition of the chariots, right? The chariot race was erat, right? It was in the Circo Maximo, in the Circus Maximus. That's the giant racetrack, right, of Rome. And acceptum erat. Now notice here how acceptus, right, is spelled acceptum. That's because it's the neuter form. So that's a little tricky to spot, and we'll deal with it when we see it. But acceptum is the neuter singular, right, nominative form of acceptus, the adjective. What's it describing? Certamen, which is also nominative neuter singular, right? So they do match, even though they look a little different. So you're saying the chariot race was in the Circus Maximus, and it was acceptum. It was, you might say, accepted or welcomed or kind of appreciated, you might say, maxime, greatly, by the Roman people, popolo Romano. And again, maybe pleasing is a better way to do acceptum. But the key is understanding that acceptum is describing certamen. And even though they don't quite look the same, it's only because you have an adjective describing a third declension noun. Sometimes it looks a little screwy, but they do match each other, right? So there's very pleasing, you would say, to the Roman people, which is true. They love chariot races. And if you read through the culture unit I just mentioned on my textbook, you'll see we think the chariot races were actually more popular than gladiator fights. And part of the logic of this is looking at the size, right? The Circus Maximus could hold hundreds of thousands of people. It's monstrous, right, compared to the Colosseum. So it gives you a sense of how popular they were. But we know they love chariot races, right, even though they like both of them technically. Then we continue. You have multitudo, virorum et feminarum et liberorum certamen quadrigarum magno cum studio spectabat. So the crowd, the multitude of men, right? So the crowd of men, virorum, and of women, feminarum, and of children, liberorum, right? What were they doing, this crowd? The crowd was watching spectabat. What was it watching? The certamen, the competition. That's another example of third declension, neuter, accusative, singular, right? It looks exactly the same as the nominative because it's neuter, right? Nominative and accusative, always the same thing. And since it's singular, whatever that crazy nominative singular, the dash on our chart is, that's also the accusative singular. So again, this is saying the crowd of men and women and children was watching, right, the certamen quadrigarum, the competition of the chariots, right, the chariot race, magno cum studio, with great eagerness, zeal, however you want to translate studio, right, excitement might even work. So they're watching it really closely. Then you have principium certaminis quadrigarum a domino ludorum nuntiabatur. So the beginning, the principium, the beginning of the certaminus, of the competition, right, and it's the certaminus quadrigarum of the chariot race, you'd say, was announced. Nuntiabatur is imperfect passive. So it was announced by whom? We need an ablative here. A domino, by the master, ludorum, of the games, right? The kind of officiant, the person leading the games, right? The master of the games. So there'd be something to tell you that, the beginning of the race, right? Announcement that the race was going to start. Then you have tum spectatores cum studio auriga salutaban. Then the spectators, there's your subject, spectatores, they salutaban, they were greeting the aurigas, the charioteers, cum studio, with eagerness, with zeal, right, with excitement. And then we continue, and you have saipe auriga erat servus. So often the charioteer, the auriga, was a slave, erat servus, right? The corpus, right, or I should read in Latin, you have corpus aurigae, aut rubra, aut alba tunica tegebator. So the body, the corpus, right, of the charioteer, aurigae, tegebator, it was, you might say, like protected or covered. Either way, it's going to work, but it's imperfect passive. So it was covered, or it was protected by what? Well, you have out here, which means either or. So you're saying it was protected either by a red or a alba, a white tunica, right? So it's being protected by the tunica, the shirt, and that shirt is either red or white, right? They're giving you some colors here, but it's all ablative to go with our passive voice verb. Colore tunicae Romani corpus aurigae cernebant. So the Romans, cernebant, they were, you might say, like distinguishing or recognizing is kind of one way to do it. Distinguishing, I guess. The corpus, there's our accusative. It's a neuter word, right? And it's so that US ending is why it looks kind of like it should be second declension. It's not, right? It's third declension neuter. That's our accusative. What are they recognizing? The body of the charioteer, the corpus aurigae. Okay, so they recognized, you might say, the body of the charioteer by the colore, by the color of the tunicae. So it's saying they could recognize and distinguish between riders based on the color that they're wearing, right? Which is true. Then you have pulchra erat aurigae magnitudo corporis. So here you want to say the magnitudo corporis, right? The size of the body, right? So the stature is really what that means. So magnitudo corporis literally means like the size or greatness of the body, but I think stature is what our textbook told you can think of. So the stature rather of the charioteer aurigae was pulchra. It was beautiful, right? It was handsome. So it's saying that the sort of stature, the body of these athletes was like handsome, beautiful, right? Pulchra, right? Because they're extremely athletic. Then you have maxima cum celeritate equi correbant. So the horses, the equi, there's our subject, were running correbant with the greatest speed, maxima celeritate, right? So with the greatest speed. Corpora equorum erant pulchra. Here we have, again, corpora is the neuter nominative plural, right? Third declension of corpus. Okay, so it means the bodies. So the bodies of the horses erant pulchra were beautiful, right? You have these highly trained athletes, these highly trained horses. Okay, spectatores corpora equorum laudabant. So here we have to do a little context because, again, you have the word corpora, but I highlighted in blue because it's accusative. The subject here is spectators because they were praising. The bodies don't praise anything. It's the spectators were praising the bodies, equorum, of the horses, right? The sort of stature of the horses. Okay, so you praise the charioteer and you also appreciate the animals that have been trained for these races. Then you end with this paragraph. You have Victori certaminus quadrigarum palma a domino ludorum dabatur. So you're saying the victors, right? The victori, the victors of the chariot race, certaminibus quadrigarum, right? Of the competition of the chariot, is literally what it says, of the chariot race. The victors, dabator, they were given, right? It's imperfect passive. Say they were given the palma, the palm, right? The sort of palm of victory. Who were they given this by? We're looking for an ablative, a domino ludorum, by the master of the games, right? So the victor would get the sort of victory palm. Okay. Or you'd even say, I did this backwards. Palma is your subject. You're saying the palm of victory was given by the domino ludorum, by the master of the game, to the victors, rather. Victori is dative. I wasn't paying attention on that one, so scratch what I said. Victori is dative. So it makes sense. Remember, when you give, when you have a verb of giving, usually give something to someone. So here it's saying the palm was given to the victor of the chariot race. So the one victor gets the palm of victory, you'd say. Then you have munus era aurigae gratum. So the reward was gratum. It was pleasing to the aurigae, right? To the charioteer. Again, munus, right, means gift. It's third declension neuter, munus muneris. So you want to remember that munus there is nominative singular. It looks kind of different, that US ending, but I'm telling you, it goes in the dash. It's third declension, nominative singular neuter. So it's saying the gift was pleasing to the charioteer. Multa munera pulchra victoria spectatoribus dabantur. So you're saying many beautiful gifts. There's munera, right? It's plural now, so the a ending, right, tells you it's nominative plural. So many beautiful gifts were given, dabantur, again, imperfect passive, by the spectators, spectatoribus. It's an ablative plural, by the spectators to the victor, right? So saying that the victor, right, you get a lot of stuff, a lot of gifts, right, if you win. Then you have Cras Cornelius cum filiis Lucio et Aulo circum maximum iterum intrabunt. So tomorrow, Cornelius will enter. Intrabunt is future tense. The BU gives it away, right? It's a first conjugation verb. So tomorrow, Cornelius will enter, again, iterum, the circum maximum, the circus maximus. So he'll enter it again, because he's been there before, with his sons, Filiis, with his sons, Lucius and Aulus. It's all ablative because it's going with cum, right? The preposition. So tomorrow, he's going to enter with his kids. Ibi pueri certamen quadrigara maximo studio spectabunt. So there, the boys, the pueri, they will see. Spectabunt is future tense. They will see the certamen, right? This is neuter accusative singular, third declension. How did I know? Because the certamen is not seeing anything. It's saying the boys will see the certamen, right? The context tells you. And it's the certamen quadrigarum, the chariot race, or the competition of the chariots, you might say. So tomorrow, they're going to watch it maximo studio with great eagerness or zeal, right? Excitement. Clamore spectatorum circum maximum complebunt. So the shouts of the spectators, complebunt, will fill, right? It's future tense. The BU, again, gives it away. They will fill the circum maximum, the circus maximus. Okay, so hopefully that made some sense and you're able to kind of follow along and practice it. Third declension nouns, the neuters take some getting used to, right? Just because you have that overlap of nominative and accusative, sometimes it can be a little tricky. Always go with context, right? Look at the whole sentence and piece it apart and say what makes the most sense here. And the more you do it and practice it, the better you're going to be at recognizing the different cases of these third declension neuters. If you have any questions at all, put them in the comments below. If you have anything you're not sure of in my translation, just let me know. I'm happy to help. But otherwise, keep reading it. Again, do the read and reread method. And what you're looking for is when you hit a point where you're able to read this without living in your dictionary and without having to constantly look up the grammar. If you can get there, you're in a really good place. Good luck with it.